On August 12, 2026, former Chinese Premier Zhu Rongji died in Beijing. He was 98 years old. For many young people today, Zhu Rongji may simply be a name from history. But for people who lived through China's economic changes in the 1990s, his name represents a very important period. It was a time when China was changing very quickly. The country was moving away from a traditional planned economy. It was building a more market-based economy. And Zhu Rongji was at the center of many of these changes. So who was Zhu Rongji? And how did he help change China? Zhu Rongji was born in Changsha, Hunan province, in 1928. In 1947, he entered Tsinghua University. He studied electrical engineering. After university, he worked in different government departments for many years. But his career was not always easy. He experienced many political and professional difficulties. His rise to national attention came much later. In the late 1980s, Zhu became mayor of Shanghai. He later became the Communist Party's secretary of Shanghai. At that time, Shanghai was trying to find a new path for economic growth. Zhu pushed the city to change its industrial structure. He supported more international trade and investment. He also helped move forward the development and opening of Pudong. Today, Pudong is one of the most famous financial and business areas in China. But in the early 1990s, it was only beginning its transformation, fighting inflation and economic overheating. In 1991, Zhu Rongji became a vice premier of China. China's economy was growing very fast. But fast growth also created serious problems. Investment was rising too quickly. Inflation was high. There were also problems in the banking and financial systems. Zhu became one of the main officials responsible for dealing with these problems. In 1993, he also became governor of the People's Bank of China, China's central bank. He pushed for stronger economic controls. He worked to reduce inflation. He also supported changes to China's tax and financial systems. China eventually brought inflation under control without causing a major economic collapse. This period became an important part of Zhu Rongji's reputation. He became known as a tough economic reformer, becoming premier. In 1998, Zhu Rongji became premier of China. But he took the job at a very difficult time. The Asian financial crisis had hit many countries in the region. China was also dealing with serious floods. Many state-owned companies were losing money. The banking system had major problems. And millions of workers faced uncertainty. At the same time, China wanted to continue its economic reforms. Zhu chose to push forward, reforming state-owned companies. One of the biggest changes was the reform of state-owned enterprises. For many years, state-owned companies had played a huge role in China's economy, but many of them were inefficient. Some were losing large amounts of money. Zhu believed they needed to become more efficient and competitive. The government closed, merged, or restructured many state-owned companies. The reforms helped improve efficiency in many parts of the economy. But there was also a very painful side. Millions of workers lost their old jobs or were laid off. For many families, this was a difficult period. People who once believed they had a job for life suddenly faced an uncertain future. So when we talk about Zhu Rongji's reforms, we need to remember both sides. The reforms changed China's economy, but they also had a real human cost. Economic reform is not only about numbers. It changes people's lives. Changing China's housing system. Another major change was housing reform. In the past, many urban Chinese workers received housing through their workplace. Housing was closely connected to the work unit. But this system began to change. China moved toward a more market-based housing system. People increasingly bought their own homes. This helped create a huge housing market. Over the following decades, real estate became one of the most important parts of China's economy. For millions of Chinese families, buying a home also became one of the biggest financial decisions of their lives. The effects of this transformation can still be seen today. Tax, banking, and government reform. Zhu Rongji was also involved in major changes to China's tax and financial systems. The government changed the way tax revenue was divided between the central government and local governments. China also continued reforming its banks and financial markets. Zhu pushed government departments to become smaller and more efficient. These reforms may sound technical, but they were very important. They helped build many of the basic systems that supported China's market economy in the following years. China's entry into the WTO. But perhaps one of the most important events during Zhu Rongji's time in government was China's entry into the World Trade Organization. The negotiations were long and difficult. Joining the WTO meant China had to open more of its economy to international competition. It also meant changing many domestic rules. Some Chinese industries worried about foreign competition. But China's leaders believed WTO membership would create major opportunities. In December 2001, China officially joined the WTO. This became a turning point. China became much more deeply connected to the global economy. Exports grew rapidly. Foreign companies invested heavily in China. Chinese factories became an increasingly important part of global supply chains. Over the following years, China became known as the factory of the world. Hundreds of millions of Chinese people experienced enormous economic and social changes during this period. Zhu Rongji was one of the key figures behind China's WTO negotiations and economic opening. Why do people still remember Zhu Rongji? Zhu Rongji was not only known for his economic policies. He was also known for his personality. He had a reputation for being direct. He could be tough. He spoke strongly about corruption, and he often said government officials should tell the truth and take responsibility. This style made him very different from many other political figures. It also made him one of the most recognizable Chinese leaders of his generation. But like almost every major reformer, his legacy is complicated. His reforms helped make China's economy more efficient and more connected to the world. China experienced extraordinary economic growth in the years that followed. But some reforms also created serious difficulties for ordinary people. State-owned enterprise reform meant unemployment for many workers. Housing reform helped create a property market, but China's property sector later developed serious problems of its own. Fast economic growth also came with rising inequality and other social challenges. So Zhu Rongji's legacy cannot be explained with only one word: success or failure. History is more complicated than that. He helped shape an era. Zhu Rongji stepped down as premier in 2003. After that, he gradually disappeared from public life. But many of the changes made during his time in government continued to shape China. State-owned enterprise reform, tax reform, financial reform, housing reform, government reform, and China's entry into the WTO. These were not small changes. Together, they helped transform the structure of China's economy. China became more market-oriented. It became more urban. It became more connected to international trade. And eventually, China became the world's second-largest economy. Zhu Rongji did not create this transformation alone. China's economic rise involved many leaders, millions of businesses, and hundreds of millions of workers. It also took place within the broader reform policies that China had followed for decades. But Zhu Rongji was one of the key figures during one of the most important periods of that transformation. A life ends, but the debate continues. On August 12, 2026, Zhu Rongji died in Beijing at the age of 98. His death closes the life of one of the most important economic reformers in modern Chinese history. But understanding his legacy will take much longer. Perhaps the most interesting question is not how many reforms did Zhu Rongji introduce. The more important question is, how did those reforms change the China we see today? More than 20 years after he left office, China is still dealing with questions connected to that era. What should the role of state-owned companies be? How should China manage its property market? How open should its economy be? What should China's relationship with global trade look like? These questions are still important today. And that is why Zhu Rongji's story is not only a story about the past, it is also a story about modern China. A person's life eventually ends, but the impact of major decisions can continue for generations. Zhu Rongji, 1928 to 2026. What do you think was Zhu Rongji's most important impact on China? State-owned enterprise reform? Housing reform? Or China's entry into the WTO? Let me know what you think in the comments.